All right, let's get into dirty gear versus clean gear. Dirty gear and clean gear, obviously, clean gear is going to function better. Why? What absorbs heat faster? Dirt, obviously. So when we have dirt, soot, moisture, things of that nature on our gear, and we go to fight a fire, and you're in clean gear and I'm in dirty gear, your gear is going to perform better because my gear is dirty and it's going to absorb heat faster. And I'm going to be hollering and saying it's hot in here. And you're going to say, what's wrong with you? The other thing we don't think about when we have dirty gears, every time we get it dirty, we don't clean it, we don't think about where it's going. It's something called layer by layer contamination. Our gear is not bulletproof. That stuff soaks through, gets through cracks and crevices, and I'll show you how. And the other problem we have, and I am super guilty of this, gloves, hoods, boots, and helmets aren't always cleaned properly. And being a bald man, I understand cleaning the helmet a lot better now than I used to, especially I have friends who've had cancer cut off of their head, and they had full heads of hair when they got it. So, how you clean it? What are the rules, regulations, and what are the basics without having to read this 200 pages worth of stuff? How about something called gross decon? Well, they took that out and changed it to preliminary exposure reduction. It's just a fancy word for every time you have an exposure, your gear gets dirty, food on the stove, a real fire, got it nasty and dirt, whatever, it's gross decon. You brush stuff off, rinse it off, an approved detergent, and you change out your dirty hood for a clean hood. You use wipes on your contact areas, such as fire wipes, and you don't allow your gear to hang out in the sun, which is what I used to do. I'm throwing myself under the bus. I'm not preaching at you. I did all this stuff. Okay. Trying to protect you and say these are the mistakes I've made. Okay. Here's another one I made as a volunteer firefighter. How many of us as volunteers carry our gear in our truck where our family is, where they breathe that stuff that's off gassing? Do you know why they don't want us taking this stuff into the bedrooms and whatnot? Because it will basically off gas the stuff that you've been exposed to long after the fire. You want your kids breathing that? No. Another thing is CBRN incident exposure, basically chemical, biological, radiation, or nuclear. You think that if we're exposed to a chemical incident, our gear is going to be cleaned and given back to us? No, more than likely it's going to be condemned, retired, or disposed of. And hopefully we're not disposed of. Hazmat exposure, however, depending on what it is, can be cleaned, inspected, and cleaned by a service provider. And I'm going to talk to my hazmat friends here a little bit later about boots and dispel some myths about rubber boots. Dirty gear, the basics. Your fire department should have an established guideline on cleaning the gear. Approved gear washing machines, and read some of the PowerPoints I'll share with you that came from the Fiero conference on how they're changing those standards, what temperatures it should be washed at, what soap you should use, and how it's properly dried, such as air drying your gloves instead of wringing them out and messing up the liners inside of them. Here's another thing that I didn't know. If you wash your gear initially, the first 5 washes, it does something called lofting. You know what that means? It improves the thermal protective performance of your gear initially. That's pretty cool. Didn't know that. Eventually, uh, eventually the case may be that your TPP and THL will degrade over time. But if you take good care of your gear, it will take good care of you. But we want to use gear washers, not regular washing machines. We don't want to use just basic Tide. We want to use what the department or what the provider or manufacturer tells us to do. We don't hang it out in the sunlight to dry. I know I've done it too, but you're taking away precious seconds that you could use in a fire to save somebody's loved one by doing that. Okay. And remember, dirty gear absorbs heat. You want to absorb more heat, or you want absorb heat based on your ability of the gear's thermal protective performance? You don't want to lessen that by having dirty gear.